Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Register, Executive Director of Clean Virginia Waterways of Longwood University. Welcome to our 2022 webinar on stormwater and plastic pollution. This webinar is sponsored by Clean Virginia Waterways with assistance from the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. Our goal for these stormwater webinars and workshops are to address urban trash pollution and share strategies employed to intercept a piece of trash before it becomes part of stormwater runoff and is conveyed through the storm sewer system. So our work is to build collaboration and communication. And in fact, those are key components of the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, which Zach is going to mention a little bit during his presentation. So we're glad you're here with us today. As far as questions, we do ask that you use the chat box for any questions that you have, and then we will present them to our speakers. So use the chat box anytime that you've got a question in your head. And we will do Q&A after each of our speakers. If you are interested in finding presentations and agendas from our previous 4 stormwater and litter and plastic pollution workshops, please visit the Clean Virginia Waterways website. We'll put a link in the chat. Recordings from today's workshop, as I mentioned, will also be found there in the near future. So I know a lot of you are from Virginia and some of our mid-Atlantic neighbors, but I'd like to have Zach pull up a poll in which we're going to ask you where you're from real briefly. Are you from Virginia, one of the nearby states, or somewhere else? So let's everybody go ahead and answer that question if you would. And in a few minutes, we'll share the results. I know we had a couple people from Africa who said they were interested in joining us, so they might be those others that we've got there. All right, we'll give it another few seconds.
Well, where's the poll?
The poll should be viewable. I see a lot of you are voting.
Cindy, you're a host, so you won't be able to see the poll.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, so Zach, could you go ahead and share the results of that? So 91% of the people online right now are from Virginia. We've got one from DC, a couple from Maryland, and a few from others. So welcome. We're glad you're here with us today. So at this point, I will share with you. Oops, sorry. Our first speaker, and before I introduce her, we know from our work on plastic pollution for many years that solving this problem of litter or floatables in our stormwater, plastic pollution in our communities and in our waterways, it's going to take several strategies. It's going to be including prevention, and prevention includes behavior change, education, outreach. It's going to take research and monitoring. It's going to take proper disposal, and that might include interception, which Hannah's going to be talking about in a minute, intercepting this plastic pollution before it gets into the storm drains or once it's in a stream. Infrastructure is part of the solution. Certainly removal and also policy. And when we say policy, we mean legislation as well as enforcement of current legislation. So today's seminar, or webinar rather, is going to focus on a lot of these, especially removal, interception, also policy legislation. And very importantly, we're going to end with a presentation by Zach, who's going to be talking about how all of these strategies are tied to funding and resources. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Hannah DeFrond. Hannah works with the University of Toronto's trash team and also Ocean Conservancy to coordinate the International Trash Trap Network. International Trash Trap Network. It's a tongue twister. The network aims to expand the use of trash trapping technologies to increase global plastic pollution cleanup efforts. And they also work to quantify the debris that they're finding as part of the International Coastal Cleanup online database. They also work to bring together local stakeholders to build these local trash trapping programs and engage the communities in upstream solutions, which we're really excited about. She has a master's degree in marine environmental management from the University of York in the UK. And she was previously a researcher at the University of Toronto, where she worked on testing and improving laboratory methods on microplastics. So Hannah will be sharing information about the International Trash Trap Network and technologies. So Hannah, please go ahead and share your screen. And a reminder, if you have questions for Hannah, please put them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, I am going to share now. Just let me know if it looks okay. All good? Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's morning for me. I'm on the West Coast, but good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the team at Clean Virginia Waterways for inviting me to speak today. So Katie, you gave me a great introduction. So my name is Hannah DeFrond. I coordinate the International Trash Trap Network, which is a mouthful. And today I'll be presenting on the network and our goal to connect local solutions to tackle global plastic pollution. And so to start, I know everyone here is likely very familiar with the issue of plastic pollution, but I'd just like to briefly take a moment to remind ourselves why we need cleanup as part of the solution. So in 2020, our team were involved in a study where we investigated the actions that were needed to significantly reduce global plastic emissions using a combination of plastic reduction and prevention, waste management, and cleanup. And from this work, we concluded there was no one-size-fits-all strategy to reducing plastic pollution, and so we need locally informed solutions. What we also found was that waste reduction and management are of course critical, but cleanup is also an essential part of the solution. So we need a combination of all three strategies to achieve a significant reduction in plastic emissions globally. And so we know that a significant amount of plastic waste is already accumulated in the environment, and community cleanups around the world are collecting millions of pounds of trash each year, which is fantastic. But to make a measurable difference now and into the future, we need to increase cleanup efforts worldwide by orders of magnitude. And so the question is, how best can we do this? And this is where we see trash traps as part of the solution. So trash traps are technologies designed to clean up and divert plastics and other anthropogenic and human waste pollutants from our waterways. And they can supplement community cleanups by running 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And they can also collect waste items ranging from large items like bottles, all the way down to small microplastics that are really challenging to collect by hand. And so there are now a wide variety of devices available. And so this is great because it means a suitable device can be chosen for each specific scenario and waterway. And so, for example, in a large river channel full of floating trash, a trash wheel or some larger device might have the greatest impact. And then in a harbourfront slip in a marina full of floating microplastics, as you can see here, sea bins might be the best solution for cleanup of those tiny particles. So I've mentioned that the primary benefit of trash traps is to capture and divert waste, but we also know they have other benefits too. So there can be great focal points for public education and awareness of plastic pollution. So by talking to the public and community members about how these devices work and what they're capturing, we can demonstrate that plastic pollution is not a faraway issue and it's happening right on our doorsteps, and that cleanup is one of the ways to manage it locally. What's more, we see that trash traps can also act as sampling tools for data collection. So by documenting what we're capturing and understanding what the most common waste items are in our waterways, we can understand sources and then inform upstream solutions and policy and management. And so all of these things can happen on a local scale, but collectively they can be part of the global solution. Oops. And so in seeing the value of trapping trash and in noticing that more and more projects are happening around the world, we formed the International Trash Trap Network, or the ITTN, which was in 2021 we launched. So the aims of the ITTN are to exponentially increase global cleanup efforts and to quantify our collective impact as part of the international coastal cleanup by using harmonized methods. So just as groups around the world collect trash and clean up data each year with the ICC, we do the same thing using trash traps. And we also want to bring together local stakeholders to build trash trapping programs that will not only clean up our waterways, but will actually engage the community and also collect valuable data. And so to assist with this mission, we've developed several free and easy to access resources for a successful project. And I'm going to go through a few of those now. So first off, to guide groups through the process of finding the right location, we've developed a visual audit protocol, which allows you to identify litter accumulation hotspots in your local area using data from the field. We also have developed a device directory, which includes many information on many devices that are currently in use around the world. And then to tie all of this together, we have a project checklist, which is essentially a sort of step-by-step guide for a successful project, all the way from thinking about those first decisions, like where you're going to put it, what type of device you want, to thinking about how you use the device in the long term, who's going to be collecting data, what you're going to do with that, are you going to have an outreach program set up, all those things that are useful and great for impact in the long run. And so today, I'm going to run quickly through some of the considerations and options for choosing the right device for your scenario. So this will give you a bit of insight into what our device directory has within. So when thinking about what device might be the right one for you and your project, there are a few things to consider. And the first is the location, as I mentioned. So where are you going to put it? Do you want to put it in a river channel or a lake or within an urban stormwater system? The second factor is your target pollutant. So I know that often the goal is to capture waste and capture as much of it as we can, but sometimes groups might have a specific pollutant in mind, for example, pre-production pellets. And for this goal, some devices are much better than others at capturing the small stuff. The third factor is cost. So obviously trash traps cost money to purchase and to maintain. And the price tag can range from extremely low cost if you decide to do a DIY device and make it yourself, to on the higher scale of cost for things such as skimmer vessels and trash wheels and those larger trash traps. The fourth factor is maintenance. So how often does the trap need to be emptied? How often do you want to empty it, or how often really can you empty it, depending on your people power, your costs, all those sorts of things. The fifth is capacity. So some traps have collection points that can hold large amounts of waste, and these are great for situations where maintenance needs to be less frequent, but it does mean that often when you go to remove that waste, there will be lots of it, so you might require some infrastructure to help. If this is not an option, then there are smaller devices with smaller catch bags that need emptying more often, daily or weekly, and this is usually a really quick and easy job and can be done by 1 or 2 people. Last but not least is visibility. So do you want your trap to be obvious and use it as a focal point for outreach and have people excited and looking at it, or do you want it to be more discreet but impactful? So these are all things you need to consider when thinking about the device. And so in thinking about these factors, I'm going to now dive into some examples of devices that are currently in use around the world and how they compare. But just as a quick FYI, this is not an exhaustive list of all the different types of traps out there. And there are examples in here that I just wanted to show because they are ones we're familiar with. And I've included some estimates of costs on my slides, but these are just from experience, from what we know, from groups in the network, and also from information that's available online. So please do not hold me to these estimates. They're just intended to give you some sort of starting information about the different types of traps. So first up, we have what I call stationary skimmers. So as an example of these, we have sea bins along the Toronto harbour front that we use to collect debris. And these are essentially floating trash cans that sit on the surface of the water. They're mounted to a dock and they collect floating trash, including microplastics. And these can range in cost from anywhere from 6 to 20,000 USD, which is on the comparably on the lower side of the scale compared to other traps, which I'll mention later. And because they're small, they're often the size of a trash can, they need to be emptied more regularly, so daily or weekly, depending on your environment, the amount of trash collected, and if there's been a rainfall event, all these sorts of factors can impact that. Because they're smaller and they're often situated around docks, they can be hidden and can be quite discreet, but they can be made more visible by positioning signs and posters nearby, for example, and some of them, like the collector in the top left of the screen, is bright red, so it attracts more attention just by being bright. Next up, we have automotive. So they're similar to skimmers, but they move around. So I like to think of them as kind of little floating robots with mouths that eat up the trash as they swim. Particularly in the example of the waste shark, I think that really looks like a manta ray. So these are remotely controlled, and so they're often used in semi-confined waters and along coastlines. So their movement can be monitored and they can be directed around to target the trash that's floating. Because these are essentially drones, they are on the pricier side, and so the estimates we've found have ranged from 20,000 USD upwards. Each time these devices are used and they come back to shore or they're finished with their use, they need to be emptied. And because they're quite cool contraptions, they do have high visibility, and I've had experience in using the B-bot, which is in the top right of the photos, and you will always have someone come up to you and ask what you're doing and show real interest when you're using one of these devices, because they are very cool. Next up, we have stormwater traps, which I know some of you are very familiar with. So these are positioned within storm drains. They capture urban debris that is often washed into the drains during rainfall events. They often have either a grate or a sort of catch basin within the drain that can be cleared and emptied around 2 to 3 times per year, which means they are quite low maintenance. Because of their relatively simple design, they are also one of the cheaper options for trash traps, with many options below the 1,000 USD mark. They're also highly adaptable because no storm drain is the same, and so manufacturers of these devices have designed them to be adjustable by size and shape depending on the basin that you're looking at. In terms of visibility, they are hidden in the ground, and so they are quite low visibility. But an example is the gutter bin in the center of the screen. So they've come up with some quite cool storm grate designs, which can either be brightly colored, or I've seen some that have been branded as well, which are great for drawing attention to the trap and who owns it and who's involved in the project. A slightly more industrial version of storm drain traps are these stormwater outflow traps, sometimes referred to as litter socks. So these are often in line or positioned at the end of the pipe in a stormwater system. And so because of the large amount of trash that they capture, and you can see that in the photo, these devices will often require more than just some very strong arms to empty them. They often require a vehicle, like a vacuum truck, for debris removal, which means you have to consider this in your annual costs, because maintenance and payment for debris removal is something you'll have to consider. Again, if these are hidden underground, or they're often positioned at the end of a pipe where not many people will visit, then they are low visibility. But as you can see, they have quite a big impact if a lot of waste is entering the environment through these stormwater systems. Next up, we have booms and barriers, which are great for collecting floating debris and plastics along a river channel. So they can be really low cost and low technology. And for that reason, I love them as a great option for a DIY trap, or groups who are just starting to think about what their options are for trash trapping. We've seen some groups make these themselves, make these booms out of floating bottles with netted tube around them, which costs very little to make, and it makes them really easy to install and remove. And because they're essentially a barrier stopping passing trash, debris removal is quite flexible. So you can leave it to build up and do it all at once, so you can do it at regular intervals. It just depends on how much litter you're collecting, if there's been a rainfall event, all those sorts of things. Okay, on a similar note is what I call barriers and booms with a collection point, which are, they work the same as the previous booms and barriers, but they have a specific central or area where there's a storage point for all that waste. And so the collection point often has a certain capacity, and so these need to be emptied on average weekly, from what I've been told. But again, it depends on how polluted the waterway is and all the other factors I've mentioned. These devices tend to get quite a lot of public attention, I think, because they're slightly bigger than some of the other devices. And in the example of Mr. Trash Wheel, who I'm sure some of you are very familiar with, you can really take advantage of this. You can add fun logos, you can add branding, or you can even give them personalities, like has been done for the trash wheels in Baltimore. Next up are vacuum devices. So these are used often on land and along coastlines and work like a vacuum. So they suck up litter within their path, and they have a sort of nozzle that you direct around. Their only limitation is they can't pick up anything larger than the vacuum pipe. So they're suited to smaller debris and microplastics. But despite their seemingly large size, they're not as expensive as some other devices, and they can collect a lot of trash with each use due to their large storage bins. Similarly to the automotives that I spoke about earlier, these are man-powered, and so they're highly visible, and you should expect to get a lot of spectators when you're using these. Finally, we have skimmer vessels. So these are boats that work on waterways to trap trash and bring it ashore. They range in cost, similarly to how you expect boats and other vessels to range in cost, and their capacity is quite large, and it's as large as the boat hull, really. Because of their size, they are high visibility, but because they're offshore, they're working amongst other boats, they might not get noticed as much as other traps. But if you do want it to get noticed, you can always paint it bright blue and stick a logo on it, like 4Ocean have done in the photo here. So this is the final slide where I'm talking about the different devices. But I just want to say, please do reach out to me and the Trash Trap Network if you're thinking about wanting a copy of our device directory, or you want to talk more about any of the devices that I've mentioned. But I'm now going to move on and spend a few minutes just talking about some of our other resources from the ITTN that can be used to assist your trash trapping success. So once you've decided on your device and you've got it installed, you want to think about how can you measure your success. And so to do this, we've developed data collection methods to ensure that trash trapping data is harmonized around the world across different locations, different traps, different groups. We have 2 protocols that groups can use depending on your time, your people power, and your goals. And so the simple protocol is carried out each time the device is emptied, and you just document the weight of debris collected when you use this method. We also have a detail protocol that's carried out around 5 to 10 times per year to capture how waste changes across the seasons. And using this method, you document the mass, but also the counting categories of both large and small trash items. And so this allows us to quantify different types of litter and identify sources. These protocols, I should mention, were first developed using sea bins, but as the network grows, we're adapting our methods for different types of trash to ensure that although they might be sorting the waste differently and have different types of waste that you're collecting, that data is harmonized across groups. We also acknowledge that some groups are already using certain established methods for sorting and categorizing their waste, and we don't want people to change this if they're already in a long-term project, but all that we want is that the data to be submitted to the ITTN in a format that aligns with our data reporting, so the categories are comparable across groups. So moving on to recording your data, you can use paper data sheets, or we have an app called Data Trapper. But for those familiar with Ocean Conservancy and the Clean app that's used for recording cleanup data at the minute, we hope to have trash trapping data submission on Clean very soon. So we're looking forward to that. Once data is sent in to us, the ITTN team summarize this at the end of each calendar year, so we're coming up to that time now, and we share local reports on trash trapping achievements. So we summarize it for each group, and we present them with a kind of certificate or a report which shows the total weight of debris captured, the top items recorded, and so on. And so we wanted to do this because by summarizing the data for each group, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for groups in the network to use their data to inform policies around preventing plastic pollution locally, or for local reporting, or for local educational programs, and so on. We also summarize the network-wide international achievements, and this goes into the annual International Coastal Cleanup reports. All ICC data is available within Ocean Conservancy's TIDES database, which is online, where it can be used by anyone for any sorts of research and other uses. And if anyone has questions about the ICC or the TIDES database, a couple of my colleagues from Ocean Conservancy actually are here today, so they can help with any specific questions on that later. as I've mentioned, trash traps can be a great focal point for education. And so we've helped with this by creating posters that you can position by your traps to draw attention to them, and activities such as a guided waste characterization, which we've done in the photo here. We called it Sea Bin Dive. And so these create opportunities for hands-on experiences and to provide the opportunity for community members to understand and see firsthand their local plastic pollution sources and think about solutions. We also had like really great interaction from groups already in the network. So we have an example here, which is Inspector Seabin, who lives in Tobermory in Canada. He's very cute, and it gets a lot of attention on the harbour front, also directs people to learn more about the sea bins that they have and why they're there. Finally, we see the network as a platform to learn from each other and to avoid reinventing the wheel as trash trapping efforts grow. And so currently we encourage groups to share your data and also connect via our social media channels. So we have a Facebook group where members can ask questions, seek advice. If you're thinking about starting a new project, you can always shoot a question in there and there'll be someone in there who might have done something similar. You can share thoughts and recommendations. We also hold virtual workshops to share knowledge among stakeholders in specific regions. So this year we held two, one for groups in West Africa and one for groups in the Caribbean, where we had lots of interest in trash trapping, and these were great and we really hope to do some more in the future. So that's it for me. So if after all of this info you are considering joining our network, please do let me know. As of this year, we have about 100 devices in the network, and we're hoping for next year to continue growing and kind of harmonizing efforts globally. So if you have a trap already or not, please get in touch. We're happy to share information and share our resources, and you can download all of these on our website as well, which I can share in the chat in a moment. And then you can begin connecting with groups and collecting harmonized data. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening, for having me speak. And these are my contact details for anyone who's interested.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. Lots of great information there and many questions for you in the chat. First, I wanted to compliment the efforts you all have made to, as you say, not reinvent the wheel. We've seen that a lot with groups that are trying to monitor and understand their plastic loading, the characterization of the trash in their waterways, and everyone's coming up with a new data form that don't talk to each other. So I think that's one of the strengths of the network, to have the one platform for data collection. But let's get to the questions. So one was about permitting requirements to install boom type trash traps. What kind of requirements have you heard about?
That's a great question. So it really depends on location. So if you're going to, we've heard people have to talk to the city or where they live, or talk to different, we've been in contact with like local environmental groups, different stakeholders who either use the river channel or have some kind of ownership over that land. It's really important to involve all of them in that process. So it really does depend. I can't give any specific recommendations, but for example, in Toronto, we work with Ports Toronto, who work along the harbour front, and we spoke to the city about it, and then we're involved, and then Toronto Regional Conservation Authority as well, we work with them. So that's an example.
Right. So it sounds very site specific.
Yes.
And what about trash traps as a requirement when new development is going in? Have you seen communities that are saying, if you develop this area, you have to do some trash traps? And the more specific question this person had was about athletic fields on school grounds and in communities that have artificial turf, plastic, basically turf, and the plastic runoff from that. And I might add, it's not just athletic fields, but also mulching, people that mulch with shredded rubber. So, so I guess that's two questions. One, do you know of requirements for developers to put in trash traps? And are there any special efforts for this plastic and rubber that's coming off of the land?
The answer to both is, I haven't heard of it specifically. I'm sure there is examples out there, and if there are, then good on them for doing it, because that is a great idea to have that as part of the process of project planning. We have had examples where, for example, with plastic production plants, when they've been known to emit nurdles and pellets, then we've worked with them to have it as a requirement that they install things like the litter traps and the gutter bins around their location, so that they're actually actively making efforts to contain any spillages that happen. And they would also be a really great example of something that would be useful for capturing those tiny rubber particles that you mentioned. So the storm drain traps can have, I think a few of the different device manufacturers now have made them so that they can have, you can choose to have a really fine mesh that goes in the drain, or you can have a larger mesh size. I think for those smaller particles, it would need to be quite fine to capture them. So luckily they do exist. And if that was a concern for a certain area, those rubber particles from the fields or the mulching, then that would be a great solution.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and it makes me think, I made a note, we are going to be doing a full day workshop in March of 2023 on stormwater and plastic pollution. And I think maybe we could go a little deeper into this question of plastic coming off of playing fields or mulched beds when they're mulched with rubber, because we know rubber tires have a lot of plastic in them, right?
Yeah.
Another question was about maintaining and emptying the traps. Are most of these done with paid labor, or do you know of scenarios where people work with local groups, volunteers?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually a really important one, because one of the things that we find is often a hurdle for groups who want to install a trash trap is thinking about who's actually going to empty it. And if they want to collect data as well while they're doing that, then who's going to be collecting the data? So it's again, location specific, but we've had examples of people who have contracts with the city. So say you have one of those much larger storm drain traps that needs a vacuum truck to come and empty it, then they'll have a contract with the city where they go around at certain intervals and empty them. So that's kind of paid labor. We also have examples of volunteer groups, people who are really engaged in community cleanups, also want to be involved in trash trapping. So you can also kind of utilize those sources of people for that as well. And then we also have found some groups have, they might get a grant for doing it, or they might have some funding, then they can use that to also pay volunteers or members of the organization to go and empty the traps. But it ranges. Sometimes it needs to be daily, in which case you can work for the sea bins. Often it ends up being like you could have a partnership with the Ports Authority who maintain the harbour front, and they can empty the traps as part of their kind of day-to-day maintenance. Or if it's a more kind of monthly or couple of times a year, then it might be easy just to get volunteers involved.
Great. Yeah, it seems to me like the sustainability of these is really important. Do you find that some places put them in and forget about them? You know, it's like we did what we're supposed to do. We put in the trash trap, but they don't think about
That's a really great point. So that's part of what we want to emphasize with the whole planning process, which is super important, is that you have to think about the long term. The job's not done once the device is in. There's so much to think about afterwards. I have a couple of examples where, they've had really great intentions and installed certain traps, and then just not had the people power to continue emptying them regularly or collect that data. So it's really important to think about kind of long-term plan when you're installing these devices. And also I think it's really valuable to have sort of annual or 6 monthly interval meetings or catch-ups with all the stakeholders who are involved to make sure that everyone's still happy with their roles, that they're happy to continue with their roles, all those sorts of things that enable you to keep the project going.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Hannah. Lots of great information there. I did put in the chat the link to the International Trash Trap Network website, where they've got videos and more resources. Any other closing thoughts, Hannah?
No, if anyone has any questions or wants or comments or thoughts, then please feel free to contact me, and I can share my email address as well. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, at this point, let me get to our script. There we go. So our next speaker is Dr. Cindy Smith. She's an associate professor of environmental science and policy at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. And she's also the kindergarten through 12th grade education and outreach director at the Potomac Environmental Research and Education Center. She and her team a few years ago won a grant from NOAA's Marine Debris Program to address the use of single-use water bottles. And as we all know, a big part of addressing plastic pollution is through behavior change and prevention, basically turning off the faucet of waste that we are producing. So Dr. Smith, if you would share your screen and tell us about your program.
Okay, you can see my screen, I'm assuming. I am sharing.
Yes. Looks
Okay.
great.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, and thank you, Hannah. That was great. We actually have one of my partners on this project in Prince William County Public Works installed a band along in one of their streams. And so students from this project work with them to do the volunteer cleanouts. So we won't address that in this. So yes, this is my project, Community Approach to Reducing Single-Use Plastic Beverage Bottles in 2 high schools in Prince William County. So we knew a lot of kids we found out in high schools, they know that marine debris is a problem. They know about straws and turtles' noses. They know a lot about that. But, you know, we're an inland community, and showing that connection from waterways, from high schools to waterways and aquatic life was a big part of what we wanted to do. So essentially our big task in this project is it was a pilot project, and we were looking at how can we change single-use bottle use behavior at 2 high schools. They're 2 pretty big high schools. One was a Title I in an underserved area, and the other one was in more further inland in Prince William County, a non-Title I high school. And we have basically the dream team of partners. And I can't stress enough, when you jump into a project like this, having great partners is essential. We had these 4 community organizations, some of which led stream cleanups. We had Public Works from the county that helped with stormwater training and mapping. We had researchers from my university in ecotoxicology and looking at risk, as well as fisheries ecology. So we had different players in the project that all helped bring this to fruition. Initially, when we started the project, our intent was to bring 20 teachers, 10 from each school, and they would select these student delegates who were strong environmental science students, but across the whole school. And they would come to the Potomac Science Center in Woodbridge, and they would go through a hands-on training where they learned all sorts of things. But COVID happened. So we had to rethink everything that we are doing. And so what we did is we ended up bringing in GMU TV and other videographers, and we made video training, which was used in a Canvas course for all the teachers and all the student delegates. And you can see some of those videos online if you're interested. And these are some of our topics that we covered. I'll go over a few of them as I go through this. Schoolyard stormwater mapping. The student delegates met with our Tim Hughes from Prince William County, and he devised maps for each of the schools, their stormwater map, and the students walked this stormwater path through the whole campus and figured out where water goes all around campus. How does it end up? Both schools had retention ponds. They also had storm drains, and that was rather enlightening. And then they did adopt the stormwater ponds on their site. They clean them out a few times a year. They keep track of that data, and then they report it back to our different partners who collect that data. And all of these authentic experiences were very engaging for them. That's what started to solidify, ooh, look at all this plastic stuff and the masks. Who put it there? I think it came from students at our school. Teachers and students also went out with some of our GMU researchers and grad students, and they learned how to collect ichthyoplankton samples, which is fish eggs and fish larvae of what we thought might be anadromous fish that breed in these local streams, but then they go back out, to the bay to grow up. And that also, again, fascinating. What we were trying to do is we were working in the 2 streams downstream from the high schools. So the kids could see, hey, look, your school's up here. Here's when that trash and the breakdowns of that trash, the plastic bottles, et cetera, floats down here. Here's some of the organisms that could be impacted. So they collected the samples, and they were, the idea was the students would analyze the samples back at school. And we actually have a video that you can watch. That was also an incredibly impactful experience for many of the students. They were like, wow, we've never really done real science in our lab that means something, which, you know, the teachers, of course, were like, what? Yes, you did. But they were looking for these little fish larvae, fish eggs. They had one of our grad students in there showing them how to do it, and knowing that they were making a real difference counted. The next part that the students were doing was they were developing a community-based social marketing campaign. And Katie's going to talk to you a little bit more about what this is, but it's this social psychology, basically, that Doug Mackenzie Moore came up with this. And it's the idea sustainable behavior change is more effective when you have direct contact with the people, and it's carried out on the lowest level. And one of the big components is changing the social norm. And what that means is what you're doing is really cool, and people feel bad if they're not doing that behavior. So that's what we were hoping to do. And the high school students at each school were to build a campaign. And in general, initially they started out and they're like, all right, how do these bottles get into our school? And they started looking around, you know, is it the after school activity, sports, concessions? Are they being sold somewhere? Is the nurse giving them out? Where do the bottles come from? And then once they knew this, they started working on, can we get them out of vending machines? And they were successful with that. They also collected baseline data because you wanted to know, you know, is this really a problem? Are there a lot of plastic bottles being brought into school? And what we found out that the bottle most commonly used were water bottles, and that most of the kids at each school, the data was a little different, but most of them owned refillable bottles. What I thought was most astounding to me is when the students responded to how many bottles they used on a typical weekday at these high schools. And this was at each high school, 2,000 per week, which means 10,000 in a 5-day week. And then if you multiply that out by how many days, you know, kids are in school, 180 days, it starts getting up there. And then when we multiplied that times the 13 high schools, we were like, ooh, just the high schools in Prince William County alone are responsible for over 4.5 million water bottles. And that was when the students were like, all right, we got to work on this. What's driving this? What are the barriers? Why are they still doing this? And so the students at Freedom High School put out a barrier survey. And I don't know if you can read all of these, but I'll just go over them kind of briefly. What we were trying to figure out is, if you do have a bottle, why don't you use it? And in general, some said, well, my bottle was dirty, or it was too big, it didn't fit in my backpack, there's not enough refill stations. We did, as part of this grant, install bottle refill stations. They admitted, I'm too lazy, or I bring my water from home. But what was most interesting to us is these two categories, where the majority, about a third of the students, were like, they didn't trust the water. Be it, it smells, it tastes bad, it looks bad, I don't trust it. These are just some of those comments. A couple, more than a few of them were like, well, that's the water that goes to the bathroom, so I would never drink it. It goes in the and others said it tastes nasty. Some commented on the chlorine comment, but they were afraid to drink it. They felt like it wasn't clean. Maybe it wasn't filtered. And so this was a big takeaway from this project, is that even though we've installed bottle filling stations and we just assume students will use them, we need to start working with our drinking water people for effective messaging. What's the sign that goes above that lets them know, yes, indeed, the water is filtered? And that would be the next step in this project, because that seemed to be quite a big barrier for many. They were like, I would never drink that. So once the students understood the barriers, they did a bit of research, then they started choosing their tools. What are we going to do to try to change the social norm? And, they worked on social media. They created a pledge based on their data, where you can't just give students a water bottle. They had to commit publicly and pledge to bring this water bottle to school. And the pledges got taped up on the wall. The students were making morning announcements. They were talking about this vast amount of water bottle trash basically that these students were indeed generating. So this was their pledge that they used, and where we talked about the survey. And one thing we learned about community-based social marketing is that you can't shame. That doesn't help. You don't shame. You make it cool. You make it, you know, the in thing to adopt this new behavior. Because if you make people wrong, then they just don't like you and they don't want to play with you, and they just are gonna, you know, back away from it. So there's a whole strategy in that. And Katie will talk a little bit more about how all of us can learn about this. The students also conducted a social media campaign, which was great to reach their peers. And if I move sort of towards the end, I mean, there's a lot more I could go over with you on this, but the lessons that we learned is that you have to model the behavior you wish to see. And it's not just at school, it's everywhere. And I can even say this, for example, I gave a talk last week, and I am working with a bunch of business leaders and agency leaders. And I'm telling them about this data and about this project and how, oh my gosh, can you believe it? Each of these high schools disposes of 2,000 bottles a day. And they're like, wow, man. And then I looked out and I'm like, and of all of you sitting here, I see 25 bottles on your desk. And I'm like, but I know I can't shame you because that won't help. But I'd love to see some different strategies come out of this group. How could you take this leadership group for the whole year and reduce your bottles? And it was great. I had somebody from our service authority, which is the drinking water people. They're like, I'll bring bottles. We're not doing this again. But it was the modeling of that behavior. You know, picking up trash when they're walking outside instead of going, ooh, that's gross. That was how they started to change the norms. And we also find that having community partners is essential because one group absolutely cannot do it all. The different groups have different specialties. Some host cleanups. Some have all the gloves, some have all the bags. I mean, so that is key. Another lesson we learned, oops, don't look at that yet. That's exciting, but don't look. Another lesson that we learn is that you have to continually evolve your administration. They were involved very much, you know, at the high schools in the beginning, but then the project just took off and the students were running it. And what we started noticing is kids would go to the nurse and go, I can't find water. And they would start handing them a bottle. We were like, oh, that's not what we're supposed to do. Send them to the refill station. So you've got to continually keep your admin involved, continually keep the nurses involved, continually keep the school involved. This is not a one-shot deal. We need to repeat the campaigns annually, and we've got to address those barriers. We also learn too that the more authentic experiences the kids can have, the more impact we have. If they get out on a cleanup or they do a cleanup on the school grounds and they do it repeatedly and they track the data and they're like, wow, we made a difference. But even having people come into the school labs, I mean, the students were like, wow, one of the comments was, that's someone who sort of like looks like me and they're doing something real with their life. So there was that career connection when we had one of our fisheries ecology lab technicians come out and talk to them about how to identify samples. And there's a video you can watch on that. You can see the students' excitement. But what was really most fulfilling to us is that the students can make a big impact. And we actually, our underserved school, Freedom High School, we had two students, Stephanie Ruiz Molina and Ashley Munez Trujillo. They worked their tails off and actually they made a difference at their school, absolutely, for sure. They motivated people, got them to sign pledges, and they won the national President's Youth Environmental Award for their actions. And we were thrilled with that. And hearing them speak, they're like, look, you know, a high school like ours, we don't normally get anything. And the fact that we got these water bottles, you know, to give out in these filling stations, we knew we had to make a difference for the rest of our students. So that was great. That was awesome. We were quite proud about that. Other components of this project, I know I'm trying to go fast to keep under our timeline, is we have worked very closely with Keep Prince William Beautiful, and they've developed a community calendar. I mean, and these are the events on for today, for example, and we're working to get this community calendar not only in a local newspaper, it's always going to be on their website, but we want to have the opportunities for cleanups, for any sort of sustainability events, For meetings like this, we could have listed this there. To be there for people, for parents, for community, anytime to come and get that, again, authentic experience. So that's another component of what we developed. There's a whole lot more that we did, but I know that I'm trying to keep it under 20 minutes, and I'm happy to take questions on this. I may have gone too fast, but anyway, that's a little bit of an overview of what we did in our project.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And yes, there are some questions for you. While you've got this slide up, there was a question about the funding source. Could you talk a little bit about the NOAA's Marine Debris Program funding? And then I believe you had to do at least a one-to-one match. So where did other funding sources come for this project?
This was, oh yeah, there's so much more to that. All right, this was funded by a NOAA Marine Debris Prevention Program grant. And it was at least a one-to-one match. We actually had cost matching from all of our community partners in there, matched with time and hours. And one of the key partners that we had from Prince William County Schools is we had their facilities department 100% on board. They actually put as a cost match bottle filling stations, which were installed at the high schools, time match there as well. And we had, some of our researchers had time on this also. So we ended up with a lot of it was expertise that was cost matched, if you will, and all the time that we put in together. I mean, our team met every week, bi-weekly for, 2 years to put this together, to try to navigate. All right, we're not really in school now. It's COVID time. What are we going to do? How do we do it differently? And I think we did, an incredibly great job because of all the different pieces that the partners brought to the table.
Oops, sorry. You also mentioned at the beginning that this is a pilot. What are your plans for sharing these resources, sharing these strategies with other schools or communities?
One of our final products is we'll have a report, but we're creating a website. And on that website, it'll be hosted on the Keep Prince William Beautiful. We have it now in draft, but kind of how you could do it yourself. Here's what we did. Here's a bunch of, here's the steps in what we did. Here's some of our data. Here's how you could do it as well at your school.
Yeah, somebody else is excited about this because they're also working with teens and wants to know about any rules on sharing this video. And I can answer that. Once this video is posted, yes, share it widely. And Cindy, I believe you've got a number of videos on your website, which we did share earlier in the chat box, but those can be shared as well, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's share this as much as possible. Let's talk about sustaining projects like this after the funding. What mechanisms are in place to make sure this program doesn't die when the funding ends?
That is a really great question, because within the high schools, and what I've seen in my many, many years of working with schools, when you have a great team and people on the ground and you've got great teachers, they keep it going as long as they're there. And so it's got to be system-wide. And so one of the things Prince William County is doing that hopefully will address this is they received NOAA BWET funding to develop an environmental literacy plan for the whole county. And so part of some of what we're doing here will be included in that environmental literacy plan. Like, for example, every school will have their stormwater plan. So if you have nothing else going on, you at least know the path of water, where stormwater flows, where the trash flows, and what's the body of water closest to your school that it connects to. Just even changing the mindset, because we find that many, many kids and teachers believe that all the water that goes down the storm drains goes straight to the wastewater treatment plant, which is not true. So that's one way that we'll do it. But no, that is a great question.
Great. And when do you anticipate your report and resources for other schools will be available?
It will have to be, I believe we have to be finished by January 31st. So it should all be completed, submitted.
Okay.
And it should be, I'm assuming it'll be linked to the NOAA Marine Debris Prevention website, and we can send everything to you as well.
Yes, please do. We would love to share it with everyone who signed up for this webinar. Also, for those of you who are not familiar with it, there is a Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network, and Cindy's a member of it. Many of you on this call are probably members of it, but it meets monthly to discuss and share. And I think we'd like to have you, Cindy, and your team come once your report's done and share with everybody how they can replicate your work in their communities. And at the end of today's webinar, we'll talk a little bit more about the Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network. Let me see if there's any other questions. I don't see any. Zach, do you know of any questions that I might have missed?
I think you got all of them.
Okay. Well, Cindy, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing in the future. Your final report will definitely help disseminate it to a wider community, and hopefully, again, have you speak at a network meeting coming up in the last part of 2023. Any closing thoughts, Cindy?
No, I just want to encourage everyone out there, when you go to a meeting, if we really want to make an impact, model the behavior. I know everyone in this room is good about it, but try to impact others if you can, especially children, because they're gonna, well, I'm not going to jump into all that. Anyway, that's model the behavior you wish to change.
Great advice. Absolutely. All the time. Well, again, thank you, Cindy. At this point, we're going to have another real quick poll. We want to know, what is the best way you get information about webinars like this? And Zach, are you able to pull up that second poll real quickly? So is it best through emails, through Facebook, through our website? If you could just go ahead and vote. And by email, we mean to include the monthly Clean Virginia Waterways newsletter, or the newsletter that goes out every month from the Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network. So please go ahead and vote as to how you are best reached. And I don't see
the problem. It's not letting responses come in.
Yeah, no one's voting. Okay.
Yeah.
We will try this later. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing that, and we will introduce Zach. So Zach, some of you have already gotten lots of emails from him. He is the Associate Director of Clean Virginia Waterways, and he works to enhance the health of Virginia's water resources through pollution prevention, education, and stewardship activities. His work focuses on using data and graphical analysis to identify strategies that will address waste related challenges. Zach has a MBA in sustainability and environmental compliance, and a bachelor's degree in science in natural resources and conservation. And we're delighted to have Zach on our team. He joined us in August, and he's going to be sharing with you some of the ongoing research he has underway, looking at how do we fund or what is some of the options? What are some of the options out there for funding some of the work that we will be working on for the next decade to get plastic out of the waterways? So, Zach, if you can go ahead and share.
Awesome. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Thanks again for joining us today. I'll jump right into Virginia's litter tax. Litter taxes and fees are a valuable tool to fund litter prevention programs and removal of litter once it's reached the environment. These taxes and fees support community cleanups, youth education, solid waste infrastructure, and other valuable programs across the country. Litter taxes are just one prong of the multi-prong approach necessary to reduce the flow of plastic pollution and litter into our waterways and communities. So why are we doing this? The Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan calls for it. One of the priorities of this plan is to identify policies from other states that could help reduce marine debris here. So we want to find out how the Virginia litter tax compares to other states with similar policies, how the litter tax can be improved here, and how it could be more impactful. And when we release our final report early next year, we'll include some recommendations of how we could incorporate the best practices from around the country here in Virginia. And when we have it ready, the report will be available at our publications page. So a little background on litter taxes here. The first litter tax was signed into law in Washington state in 1972. This law was industry's response to state legislators' interest in enacting legislation similar to Oregon's newly signed bottle bill. So the beverage industry formed a committee called the Industry for a Quality Environment. And this industry created committee proposed a law in Washington state that would support anti-litter education, enforcement, and litter pickup. And this would have all been funded through fines and bail forfeitures. So with input from the Industry for a Quality Environment, Washington legislators decided on a 0.015% tax on frequently littered items. And this law has since become one of the most successful in the country, generates over $11 million every year. Now, in the years following, states across the country began to enact similar litter taxes with the support of the beverage industry. And progress of bottle bills waned in the late 80s, with California enacting theirs in 1986. And then there wasn't another one until 2002 when Hawaii enacted theirs. So how do plastics and litter taxes connect? In 1950, there were 2 million tons of plastic produced. And that sounds like a lot until you consider that in 2021, there were 456 million tons produced. And after 50 years of community cleanups, it's evident that community cleanup events supported by litter taxes and fees, while necessary, they aren't going to stop the plastic pollution crisis. Litter taxes and fees cannot replace the necessary work to reduce the total plastic produced. And it's also unrealistic to assume the funds generated could ever keep pace with the exponential growth in plastic production. So in 1976, the Virginia Litter Control Act directed the Department of Highways and Transportation to conduct a survey to determine types of litter commonly found in the Commonwealth. And this survey was completed by research analyst Stephen Runkle. And then in the last 3 months of 1979, the Department of Conservation and Economic Development's Division of Litter Control commissioned Runkle again to conduct additional litter surveys. And this research is what formed the basis for Virginia's litter tax. And it's a system where grants are provided to localities based on population and road miles. And Virginia's litter tax, it actually constitutes 1/3 of the funding formula for the Virginia Litter Control and Recycling Fund, along with an excise tax on soft drinks and 2% of the excise tax on beer and wine coolers. And for fiscal year 2021, the fund generated $2.7 million in revenue. We'll mention here that the Virginia litter tax doubled to its current rate of $20 and $30 in fiscal year 2021. This was the first increase in the tax in its entire 5-decade existence. And this is providing additional funding to local governments and some critical programs, but it fails to keep pace with inflation and lags far behind the investment made by other states. So had the fees been adjusted for inflation, they would now be $33 and $50 respectively. So the Virginia litter tax was first implemented in 1981. And since that time, Virginia's population has grown from slightly over 5 million to more than 8.5 million people. Single-use plastics have become ubiquitous, accounting for 40% of plastic production. MS4 requirements were added to the Clean Water Act, which requires communities to monitor and have a plan to reduce the amount of plastic litter entering storm drains. And it's also important to mention here that plastic production is predicted to increase another 50% by 2050. So over the span of the 40 plus years of the litter tax, there have been countless successful programs developed in Virginia without any increased funding. So as Virginia's population grew, these organizations, volunteers, and employees were asked to provide more services to more residents with fewer resources. You'll notice on this table here that there's quite a jump in 2022, and that reflects the 2020 General Assembly House Bill 1154, which doubled the litter tax to its current rate, which is $20 per business location and an additional $30 for each location that manufactures, sells, or distributes frequently littered products. So we got a quick poll here, see if we can get this one to go right. So we'd like to know if you know how the litter tax revenue is being spent in your community. We'll give just a few more seconds as people chime in. Okay, well, still got answers coming in. I will cap it there in the interest of time. And, that's about what I expected. When I started at Clean Fairfax years ago, I didn't know what the litter tax did in Fairfax County. So that's one of the things we're working on as well. And so before we move on to other states, we're going to take a quick look at what the Virginia litter tax does by the numbers. So in fiscal year 2021, the Litter Control and Recycling Fund distributed $1.7 million in grant funds to 305 localities. And these funds were matched at a rate of 1,138%, with almost $20 million from local governments through a combination of cash and non-monetary services. And this grant money plays a critical role in community cleanups and recycling, drop-off locations, educational activities, and a whole host of other programs. So it's nearly 3,500 cleanup events with 32,000 volunteers, almost 15,000 Virginia school children, attended 565 presentations. And the spending breakdown was about 57% of the distributed grant funds were used for litter prevention and 43% used to support recycling services. So how does Virginia compare? How these taxes and fees are implemented and connected vary among states and localities, and the level of impact of the programs they support have a significant amount of variability as well. Other states and localities around the country have crafted policies that generate significantly more money for critical programs and often with fewer residents. This table here is a per capita breakdown of the litter tax for a few states and localities. Some of them we're going to look at today. And you can see Virginia down here at the bottom at 33 cents per resident. So Washington State, that I briefly mentioned bore, their litter tax revenue is $11.4 million a year with a population of 7.7 million, which is a smaller population than we have here in Virginia. And so their litter tax funds the waste reduction, recycling, and litter control account, and that distributes grants for a variety of programs. That includes $3.6 million between 2021 and 23. And this account funds some really great programs, including the Ecology Youth Corps, which pays teenagers $14.49 an hour to work Monday through Thursday during the summer on litter removal crews. And this provides these kids with some job training, teamwork and communication skills, along with some really necessary environmental education. These programs also fund adult litter crews with an $18 an hour wage. And these crews receive full-time work from March through November. Something else that these increased funds allow for are statewide anti-litter campaigns. And this includes a toolkit to ensure continuity in campaigns across the state. One of the ones that I really like is their unsecured load campaign. It includes heightened enforcement and targeted education about the importance of covering truck debris. Their litter law also mandates that there are identical trash receptacles in public areas throughout the state. The easier it is to throw trash away, the less likely it is to become litter. The Washington State program's strategy focuses on reducing barriers and increasing access. And Tennessee has a population of 6.9 million and a litter tax that generated over $7 million in fiscal year 2021. And as of 2017, Tennessee had a state law that mandates at least $5.5 million of the revenue generated through those taxes is used for the litter grant program. And the funds are used for things like litter pickup operations and litter prevention education. And similar to Virginia, the grants are distributed based on population and road miles. So in fiscal year 2021, every county in Tennessee received at least $44,200 from the litter grant program. That includes places like Pickett County with a population of only 5,001. And for reference, here in Virginia, Clark County has a population of just under 5,000. In fiscal year 2022, they received $7,981. In 2014, they received $2,445, and in 2013, they received $7,216. And much like Washington State, Tennessee has recognized the need for more action to reduce the instance of unsecured truckloads. Chester County, Tennessee, with a population of just over 17,000, used a portion of the money they received to purchase and host a tarp giveaway for county residents to reduce the risk of trash flying off the back of hauling vehicles. And this simple action resulted in a 52% reduction in roadside litter found in the vicinity of the county's solid waste facility. So again, this policy reduced a barrier to better behavior and increased access to an easy solution. And this litter tax extra revenue enables the state to invest in creative opportunities that can have an impact outside of Tennessee. So the Tennessee Department of Transportation partnered with the Tennessee Aquarium to create a litter exhibit, a river litter exhibit in April of 2021. And they have another exhibit opening this year that shows the connection between plastic pollution, water quality, and environmental health. And, you know, Virginia is home to one of the leading research aquariums in the country, undertaking groundbreaking plastic pollution and microplastic research. You know, if the funding for the litter tax were increased, it could provide a guaranteed source of funding for this important research and public education opportunity. And the extra revenue generated from this tax also enabled the state to provide some extra help to its most vulnerable communities. So there are 9 communities in Tennessee that have been identified as economically distressed. And these grants provided these counties with a combined over $400,000 that's going to assist them with litter removal and solid waste services. And New Jersey has a population of just over 9 million, and their litter control fee generates over $20 million. And this provides funding for litter abatement and cleanup and enforcement and education programs across 21 counties and 558 municipalities. And these grant funds are distributed similar to Virginia. They're based on population, road miles, and housing units. And something that is a great idea from New Jersey is to include a few exemptions to reduce the burden on lower income and smaller stores. So retailers with less than $500,000 in annual sales of the products most likely to generate litter are exempt from the fee, as well as restaurants if 10% of their annual sales are from food prepared for consumption offsite, or 50% or more of their activity is selling meals for food prepared for consumption at the location. So we also wanted to look into what some localities around the country are doing to reduce litter in their communities. So Fort Worth, Texas has a population of a little under 1 million people, and they add an environmental protection fee to every resident and business's monthly water bill. We've got the rates here on the table for you. And this fee was raised for the first time in 26 years earlier this year, which raised the revenue from $4.9 million to $16.1 million. And $6 million is designated for things like street sweepers, litter and illegal dumping cleanup, and anti-litter education. And this extra funding is intended to reduce the burden on the city's solid waste department, because the city's solid waste fund is currently spending over $4 million every year to address litter and illegal dumping costs. So this extra revenue generated from the rate increase will instead allow these costs to be covered by the environmental fund. And also important to mention here that the varying level of rate increase across the 4 categories of payees will help make the distribution of liability more equitable. So Virginia's litter tax is unique in state level policies because it's a flat fee opposed to the tax being based on annual gross receipts. Having the tax based on annual gross receipts puts a smaller tax on mom and pop stores, while stores with large sales volumes pay more into the litter funds. And again, litter taxes are an important tool in the fight against plastic pollution. With more funding, Virginia's litter grant recipients could expand valuable programs and provide more services to Virginians. Since the litter tax was implemented, Virginia's population has grown by more than 3 million people, and plastic production worldwide has increased by more than 600%. Solving the plastic pollution crisis will require an all of the above strategy. We need to pick up plastic that enters the environment, and we need to design systems so less plastic waste escapes. We also need to produce less plastic. We cannot recycle our way out of the plastic pollution crisis. The tap needs to be turned off. This is an all hands on deck situation, and Virginians are aware of the problem. So a recent Clean Virginia Waterways survey of more than 900 voters showed that 87% of Virginians are concerned about plastic floating in the ocean, and they understand the need for action. There is bipartisan support for laws to address plastic pollution. 65% of these voters support beverage container deposit programs. 63% support a ban on expanded polystyrene food and beverage containers, and 71% support policies that would require manufacturers to pay for recycling. The survey report is available on our publications page, and we'll get that link in the chat for everybody. And this research is ongoing and ever expanding. We're really excited to publish the entire report early next year. It'll include all of the information we spoke about today, in addition to a few more states and local level policies, along with some recommendations of best practices and the most impactful policies that could be implemented here in Virginia. Thank you. I'm prepared to take any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zach. Yeah, we're very excited about the research that you've got underway. And again, that full report on the litter taxes and comparing Virginia to other states will be out in early 2023. But there are some questions for you. how is the revenue generated? Like where is the money actually collected? Is it pre-sales or is it at the point of sale?
For the
For the litter
other states?
taxes, yeah. Like when you
So
say a
the
company pays a percentage based on their gross revenue, at what point in the process do they pay that?
so we're still breaking all of that down, but it's a little bit different in every state. So one that breaks it down really well, we didn't talk about it specifically today, but it's Ohio. I've got a little information. So you can see it's a tiered tax system. So the tier 1 tax is paid by all corporations, and they so the tax is determined by the corporation's net income and net worth, and it's whichever will produce the higher tax. The corporations are taxed there at a 0.014% of the corporation's net worth, or 0.11% of the first 50,000 of taxable income, in addition to a 0.22% tax on income above 50,000. And both of those tiers are taxed at 50%. So in Ohio, it's done based on the value of the company or that first $50,000. In a state like Washington, there is a separate line item. So Washington is a corporate tax based off of sales. And so there's a separate line item in their tax reporting documents that will pull out that 0.015% tax.
Okay, so for example, in Virginia, the Walmart down the street, they pay once a year
Right.
the $30.
Right. So they'll pay for the location, they'll pay the $20 for the business location. And then it's an additional $30 for places that manufacture, sell, or distribute the commonly littered items.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question is about the resource or the access to these funds. It's my understanding right now that all the litter tax revenue gets distributed to local governments. One question is, can nonprofit organizations that do cleanups and that do a lot of the education, do they have access in Virginia to these revenues for their program?
So the bulk of them are going to localities. So it's 90% is broken down through these non-competitive grants. And those are going out to the counties, like the money that I mentioned went to Clark County. Is the 10% that's competitive grants that people can apply for their programs.
Yeah, okay, but those competitive grants are also open only to local governments at this point, is my understanding.
So some local governments do work with nonprofits. My previous position at Clean Fairfax was a nonprofit. We did a lot of work with Fairfax County, and my salary was partially paid with litter tax funds when I was there.
Great, excellent. And then there was a question I got from text message about someone must have taken a deeper look at our survey of voters, because one of the questions that we asked voters is whether or not they supported a cigarette litter abatement fee. And in fact, we found most Virginians do support such a fee, I guess partly because we know that the number one type of litter in Virginia tends to be cigarette butts, which are plastic. But could you talk to us a little bit about cigarette litter abatement fees in other areas and how they're implemented, how successful they are?
Yeah, so there are a few cigarette litter abatement fees that we've been looking into. The two most prominent in the country are San Francisco and Hawaii. The way the programs are implemented are a little bit different, but the funding, it goes towards the same thing. It's infrastructure, so smokers are less likely to throw cigarette butts away, since things like cigarette, the big stands that you can put cigarette butts in. That the Hawaii litter tax funds a lot of those at their beaches. It also includes a smoking cigarette ban on Hawaii beaches. And then San Francisco has a $1 fee added to the price of cigarettes. And as Katie mentioned, they're the number one item found in cleanups. And so San Francisco actually implemented this about 15 years ago. And the fee has gone up from 50 cents to 60 to 75, now to $1. And the fee is used for stormwater, infrastructure maintenance, and litter cleanup. But we'll have a whole section on the full report on cigarette litter abatement fees. The cigarette litter abatement fees could be 20 minutes on their own.
Yes, I'm sure that'll be a big chapter of the report, which again will be coming out in early 2023, and we will be sharing that with all of you. A few other questions. We still have a few more minutes. Litter taxes as compared to extended producer responsibility legislation that was recently passed in California, and actually there's a number of states looking at extended producer responsibility. How does a litter tax fit into that larger effort?
That's a great question. That's actually something that Katie and I have been talking about. So a litter tax, it's kind of an adjacent cousin to extended producer responsibility. Stewardship programs or extended producer responsibility are programs where producers and manufacturers are paying for the recycling program. And so some of the money that comes into the litter tax is from producers of those products, but some of it is also from places that generate litter. And so there's a little bit of a difference there, but yes, they are definitely linked. And it's really important that funding for one doesn't cut off funding for the other, because the litter taxes cannot pay for recycling programs. And the burden for recycling programs is extremely high. And we've seen around Virginia that localities have canceled curbside recycling. They are canceling recycling services. And so the problem of plastics and recycling, there's not one simple answer. It's really an all hands on deck with an all of the above approach to solve it.
Great, thank you. And one other question came in about how are we sharing the results of the litter research as well as the survey of Virginia voters with local governments? And I can answer part of that. We just released the 8-page summary of what Virginia voters think about plastic pollution. That was just released in late September. And right now we're working on regional data, regional breakdowns, so that local policy makers can see what do people think about these bag fees or cigarette abatement litter fees or extended producer responsibility. We're trying to regionalize the results of our statewide survey for local governments. And then we have a big job pushing that information out to local governments, which is something we're going to be working on in January. Zach, is there anything else you wanted to add about our efforts to get all of this information to local policymakers?
One of the ways that we spread this information is by hosting webinars like this and other talks that we give. We are doing the research, and we are really dependent on folks sharing our work and going back to their localities and sharing the research. We put a lot of time and energy into this stuff. We are very passionate, and if anyone wants us to come and speak about our research, whether it's with their local civic group or environmental group or their local board of supervisors, let us know and we will jump at the opportunity.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'll also point out that at previous workshops and webinars, we have gone into some depth into the data collected by volunteers statewide during cleanups. And that data is on a internationally accessible open access data portal. It's called Tides, TIDES. We'll put that in the chat box in a second. And those data really help local policy decision makers see what are the real big litter issues in their community. So we'll make sure we'll put that on the March agenda. Again, March of 2023, Clean Virginia Waterways, along with our partner, the Coastal Zone Management Program and others, will be hosting a in-person all-day workshop. It's going to be in Arlington, Virginia. We don't have the exact dates, but we know it's going to be March. And we've got lots of ideas today from things you've put in the chat box of things that we should put on our agenda for that workshop. So we definitely will be in touch with you. We encourage you to share the recording from today with your schools and everyone else you work with. And we will let you know about the community-based social marketing workshop, which is so powerful. It will change how you craft outreach programs. It did for me. And then we'll also let you know about the upcoming stormwater and plastic pollution workshop in Arlington. Any closing thoughts from any of our speakers? Zach, do you want to go first? Any thoughts?
No extra thoughts. Just thank you to everyone for coming out and our other speakers. I hope everyone had some fun and got some new information. I know I definitely did.
Great.
Yes,
And
thank you for having me.
well, thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Zach. And thanks to all of you who joined us today. And have a great holiday. We'll be in touch through email. Thank you. Bye-bye.